Hello, everybody. So I previously did the tutorial on doing the drivers within a turn for a 2D character, but now I want to show some of the fundamentals of doing the turn in the first place and some of the ways that I think about it. So to start with, for what I'm doing, I'm not trying to recreate 3D. And there are some really cool rigs that people have made where you're getting this sort of continuous motion of it feeling like your 2D drawing is traveling around a 3D surface. And that's not really what I'm going for. I'm trying to recreate more of classic cartoon style where the turns are more drawn. And part of the way to do that is, how you think of how many slices. Like traditionally a 2D cartoon, you have two characters that are sort of facing on 45s like this. So you can see both characters, the front of both characters as they're talking to each other. So just stepping in really quick, the reason they would do characters like this is it's simpler to draw. And you can just have two characters having a whole conversation without having to draw like the backgrounds. If you look at a lot of live action stuff and you'll have the three quarters, which I think I give an example of that here. But if you have limited backgrounds or limited time or budget to create backgrounds, it's more economical to have the characters like this rather than doing this and then cutting to this, that cut back and forth, because each cut effectively adds cost to or time. If you're doing a no budget operation, it still takes time. And what I'm recreating is something like that with a little bit more, and I'll explain more as I go. So the first thing that we need to do is to try and figure out where our angles are, our slices out of the circle. So for that, I'll show you what I mean. And what I'm about to draw will actually come in very handy as you're thinking about these turns. So let me create a blank grease pencil. Switch to draw mode. I draw this circle that represents the top-down view of our head. I want to figure out where each of my turn points are, and in turn figure out how I'm going to actually draw them. So let me add another color here. I'll just use black. So this line down the center and this line, this is our very front view here. Let me put an F there. And this would be a 90 degrees to the side, a complete profile. A lot of times character designs don't look that great in profile. My characters in particular don't. That sausage face is fairly flat and featureless from the side, but it's helpful for us figuring out where we're going to put these drawings. So now, like if we think about where the nose would be on a character, if I drew these positions, you'd have a front, a 3/4 at a 45-degree angle, and a side. And then let's add one more. This right here, these would be the steps. So you'd have every 22.5 degrees. If you want to do something that's sort of classically 2D, this would probably be plenty for most of what you need with a head. And we can do more, and it depends upon the demands of your show, and it's something you have to think about. If you want to do something with more cinematic staging, like for example, let me just say, if you're doing cinematic staging where you have your character facing roughly towards camera, slightly 3/4, like say if you're doing an over the shoulder shot of two characters talking, you would want to have a slice or an angle of your turn that's just slightly off of 3/4 or slightly off of front. And so to help us figure out where we want those drawings and to use as a guide for where our drawings are and the perspective of them, I want to make just a simple shape that we can use as that guide. So let me first, I'm going to go into edit mode and move all this drawing that I just did off to the side. And let me create a cube. And the purpose of this is going to be, it's going to be our guide for our turn. And if you're not a particularly adept artist who can just draw at any angle and all that stuff, this kind of thing can come in handy. So let me darken it down. And then I am going to move this up just a little bit so it's in the center of this camera view. And the camera, by the way, is like right in the center of the world, because in reality, a 2D drawing for animation, the perspective is cheated quite a bit, because in real life, where you put a camera affects the perspective. Because if you have a camera at someone's stomach, you're going to have slight upshot on their head and slight downshot on their feet. And the only thing that's going to be level is where their stomach is. And a lot of 2D drawing for cartoons is cheated sort of with one perspective. It's not really an orthographic. It's not quite perspective, but that's why I have my camera set in the center right there. Just it'll make more sense as I go. So I'm going to take this and just quickly in edit mode, I'm going to add Control R, add a loop cut there, and then another one here. And I'm going to use this. I could just make a cylinder, but whatever. So I'm scaling using Shift Z to make sure it only scales on X and Y. So I'm going to use this as the basis for my guide for my turns. Let me actually add something that will represent the nose. And let me parent that with Command P. That way, when I rotate one, I rotate both. All right, so what I just did with the with this grease pencil drawing, showing where those slices are, to recreate that, I can go in here and just set a key, rotation at frame 1, and there's 3 in between stages here. But if I go to rotate, hitting R and then Z to rotate, I'm actually going to just type this into 90 and set another key. I'm going to change this to linear. So set interpolation mode linear. And you can see I'm getting roughly this, or the same idea as this grease pencil drawing. In fact, let me do something really quick to illustrate that. So if I go back in here, I'm going to create a new layer, and with auto key on, so I get a new frame every time I draw. So at frame 1, I'm going to just put the circle here, then go to frame 2, put that circle there. Frame 3, put that circle there, put frame and there. So now I have this circle traveling in the same places as what the cylinder is doing. And you can see how those slices align. But one, like if you wanted more, like if you want to have a smoother rotation, you could, because you can see we have this front drawing, we have this drawing that's it's at 22.5 degrees, but it's slightly facing 3/4. This one is at a 45. So if you wanted to do that classic cartoon of two people standing there and you can see both of their faces, this would be roughly where your drawings would be. And a lot of this is dependent upon your camera too. I have this camera set to a 50 millimeter. And you could even make this orthographic if you wanted to have it be completely flat. But I want to have the illusion of some perspective. So, but one thing you'll notice is these last two drawings aren't all that different. And so you could skip them. And also you could have more of them if you want to have like a completely smooth turn, like the way you'd get just like having a full traditional animation. You could go in here and add the in-between slices. Or like if I just take this key and move it out to 7, you'll notice that right here, each frame of this turn of this cylinder rotating is going 15 degrees. So now I'm getting a much smaller increment of each of these positions. And if you follow my other tutorial on setting up the drivers, you would get a lot more resolution, so to speak, of the number of slices in that turn. What like in what I was saying earlier about having like these last couple of keys barely being different, you'll see that that's barely different. You could actually eliminate that from your drawings, but if you ever wanted to have that smooth rotation, that is the reality, because it may be moving the same amount, but to the camera, the distance it travels is smaller. So for another example of this turn and just so a thing to help you wrap around your head around what you're seeing. So if you notice up here in the corner, I've drawn that same circle, but then I also have this circle here that represents where the nose is, and it coincides with this drawing. And you can see that even though that circle is moving the same, or that circle that represents the nose is moving the same distance around the form, the perception is that it's not moving that much in the actual drawing. And this is something that will come into play as you animate, just in general, the way things feel, because if you draw a straight line from your eye to that object, it's only changing, a few pixels, versus when it's over here, it's jumping quite a bit. And I originally did this just as I was just messing around while watching TV. But you can see I drew this dot that comes across the line here, and you can see these lines represent the line towards the camera. And you can see that the dot actually feels like, because of the spacing, feels like it's going slower and then speeding up and then slow. And so anyway, it's just something to think about as you're drawing here. I'm going to take these things and move them to another in their own collection. Hit M, call it reference. The other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to turn off auto key, and I'm going to move this back away from from that center line, because I'm going to draw my grease pencil on that center plane, and then I'll have this as reference in the back. So I'm going to use this camera view because, like I said, I want to create the feeling of having some perspective with my drawing. The box, as I said, is going to represent my nose. I'm going to scale this. I'm going to scale this because my characters have that sort of flat oval nose. And I could go nuts with this. I could make representation for the eyes. In fact, I do have 3D versions of some of my characters that I have just sort of as a maquette, so I can draw them from different angles. But another thing we can do is use grease pencil to create some of this reference. You know, as an eye is turning, it's getting foreshortened into an oval. I could go in here and let me create a grease pencil object, just a blank one. Let me switch to draw mode. And then I'm going to change this origin to surface. And this default value, but it sticks pretty far off the surface. So I am going to change this to 0.05, let's just say. Let me delete that and start over. Yeah, I'm going to set that to 0.05. I will draw a representation of an eye here. Doesn't need to be perfect. It's just a guide. So I can have both of them. I'm going to go in here also and add a mirror modifier. So now I have both eyes and I can use these. Actually, let me parent this object, select the grease pencil object, then the cylinder, Command P object. So now I have a representation of my eyes, which helps further illustrate what the perspective looks like. So now I'm going to create my grease pencil object that's actually for my character. So Shift A, grease pencil, blank. I'm going to call this head. I want to make this layer also head. So when I draw this time, even though I'm drawing in this perspective view, I want my drawing to be flat to the world. So I'm going to change this to origin and also plane front XZ. Now anything I draw is always going to be completely flat to that view you can see here. I'm just going to draw this like it's one of my characters, my sausage looking characters. So there's my head. Now that I have that, I can go in and I'm going to create a layer just for the nose. And if you followed my tutorial on doing the drivers, you'll see how I use these layers. So I have this first frame and I'm just going to treat this nose like it is this basic shape. Actually, let me move this guy farther back because it's sticking into my drawing. So as I'm going in here and I'm roughing out this shape, now I can go to my next key and now I have my guide. I can see that this is the back edge of the nose. So you can see that this gives, without spending a ton of time modeling the character in complete detail, I can still get a pretty good view of what this looks like in 3 dimensions, even though I'm trying to recreate it in 2D. So now I have the animation of my nose, but you'll notice the shape changes quite a bit in that drawing. But the problem actually might be more here. Let me lock my head layer so I can erase the nose layer freely. Yeah, the problem is I didn't really round that off enough as it comes around the corner. This is you can turn on onion skin, but it's very helpful to learn to see the drawing shapes evolve as you step through frames. When you're using onion skin extensively, your tendency is to sort of turn off drawing the 3D form for your head, and you're just like figuring out where the line goes in between those shapes. But it's important to always think of the shape that the 3D form that you're trying to draw, and drawing the volumes rather than just going, this line goes in between these two lines in the onion skin. And that's another thing that it's helpful to use this 3D representation for. So I can do the same thing now with the eyes. I'll create an eye layer. And I'll get into eyes more in a separate video because they don't, the way I'm setting them up, it doesn't quite work within Blender's grease pencil to have it be part of this same drawing, which will make more sense later. I have them as a separate grease pencil object. That way I can have an animated blink that's done in largely the same way, in the sense that I did individual drawings. I'm not doing, I mentioned in the other video, level pixel level. He has some really good tutorials on setting up individual components of characters, and he's using actually moving the entire layer to create a blink, and that it looks more like what you would see on something like Family Guy. Whereas I wanted, for factions, the main reason that these sausage characters exist is a property I created called factions. I wanted it to feel like everything is a drawing, not some mechanical thing. And that's why I do this rather than that sort of continuous 3D thing. But for this example, I'm gonna draw the eyes here because it does show that perspective shift. Obviously, my guide here has kind of a it's not perfectly round, but I will try and get a little bit more round. And then the same thing, I can just go in here, use this as my guide to get those subtle perspective shifts that, unless you're really adept at drawing 3D volumes, it can be challenging. And the other thing you have to keep in mind too is a lot of like the Disney cartoons and stuff like that, they're doing a lot of cheats to get things to look appealing, rather than they chase appealing rather than accuracy. I mean, one example of that you can see a lot, I'll do a terrible drawing of this, but a lot of times in comic books, a mouth drawn in further, like it's more 3/4 than the face. I'm not really sure why they do that. I guess it's more appealing, but it's really just an exaggeration of the fact that the mouth has this curve to it. And those are the kinds of things that you sort of have to just figure out. I could do that here. Like if I look at this and decide maybe that's accurate the way the eye is here, but it's not what's the most appealing, and I might want to either squash it more or keep it more round for longer. By this point, because I made the round of this head so close to where the nose is, the plane of the eye would actually be kind of tilted back. You can see by the line here. Technically, I guess you'll see just a tiny bit of that eye. So let me draw the other eyes in here really quick. So now the eye would practically be just a line. So now you can see I have a reasonably solid drawing. Obviously, I'd spend more time on this if I was going to sit there and turn this into a cleaned up drawing. Obviously, my characters are simple. Like, one of the things that in doing a rigged character, and probably why I'm going to do less of it or rely less on it for series of shorts that I'm working on, is, let me make another blank grease pencil object and I'll show you some things of why there's a lot of considerations that you have to do. And if you're building a character with more of a realistic head, or even a simple but still humanoid character design, you'll have less of the problems that I face. Because this character, if I think of it as a box first, the eyes are here. To get this shape to bend down, like to bend over towards camera, it's actually a pretty tricky bit of perspective sometimes, for me at least, to draw. So like this would be and if you guys haven't seen my characters, like the hashtag I use on Instagram is sausage folk, because they kind of look like sausages. That's the rough shape of them. So in order to get that character to lean towards camera, a lot of times I end up having to draw, a box like this to try and get that rough shape. Building that into this sort of rig, I could do it. It would take a lot of work, and I would spend more time building the rig instead of just producing the shorts. But if you have a character who has a basically spherical head, you would be able to do a more complex setup. Again, following the tutorial I did on drivers, you would just had to add the vertical motion, and I'll create a tutorial to add that to it. But let me just demonstrate what I mean really quickly. So right now we're making our nose travel around this line. It's roughly around the center. But if the character leaned down, you're going to be dealing with that line. And if he leaned up, you're going to be dealing with that line, and so on. So if I wanted to do this turn using the style that I'm doing, where I'm drawing every single version of it, I have to draw this nose, this nose, this nose, plus all the in-betweens. But then I would also have to draw this nose, and it would be this same position, but a little bit more visible. So let me draw it over here. You'd see more of the top of it there. And then the same thing with all these. So you can see it starts getting to be a really complex setup. For my series of shorts, I'm going to keep this rigged setup largely for the acting scenes. If it's just a character standing there talking, then I don't have to draw them every time, and I'm doing more subtle movements, little things here and there. But if the character has to do some action, I will switch off the rigged character and actually hand animate the action. And this happens in 2D cartoons to a certain extent, like Harmony cartoons that are done in Toon Boom Harmony. If you have a very action heavy show, it's helpful to budget in a couple of animators who can actually hand animate, just drawn traditional animation to do some of the wilder action scenes that is very difficult to get in the rig. In fact, for my series of shorts, I'm most likely going to be doing the body as a rig, but then hand animating the arms and legs. Because again, just like I was saying with the trying to get something like this, I could do it, but the setup is complex, and I'm having the same issue with the arms. Let me save this file, and I'll put this file up on Gumroad so people can look at it. It's going to be kind of a mess. I'll name some things so it's cleared up, but it will be just this file. So let me open my latest version of my character. So I have this setup that I built for the arm. If you notice the wrinkle right here that's on the elbow, I started doing this setup where the wrinkle is actually animating. And not only that, you can see where the flaws are, but I'm building a mask to hide the overlapping lines. In addition to that, I built this setting to set the depth of each of these layers. Because sometimes you want a drawing to be in front, like if the hand's being held out. There's another thing that's difficult in the rig: hand pointing right at camera. Factions is a spy show with characters shooting each other, and if I want this pose, I'm going to have to custom draw that hand anyway. But this was a setup to be able to cheat that. And if you look at the camera view over here, you can see I can get the arm to go in front. I can get the arm to be in front of the body or behind the body. And I actually did this test where you see the arm is in front, and by animating these custom properties, it's now able to go behind. So this kind of setup is great for just general acting. I will be doing just custom animation for that. And if you haven't seen this before, let me show it really quick. This is a much more complex setup, but it all follows the same features that are in the other tutorial. Since we're in here, I'll show you if you follow that same driver tutorial, you should be able to understand how I did this, because it's just a series of drawings and these controls are just running through those drawings. One last thing I will show is this character, whose name is Buck, by the way, is not in the first short, but this character is. Her name is Mad Pierre. It's Mademoiselle Pierre. Here you can see her character there. But let me show this cage that I built around it are my guides for where the features are. That way, if I'm drawing a tricky angle in one of the shorts, I can just go, okay, I can draw this box with these lines roughly in this spot, and I know where the nose is as I'm drawing these more extreme angles as I was showing earlier. But I also use that same technique of drawing on the surface. So I have this eye and mouth shape drawn on the surface. So when I go to draw this like more extreme perspective, I can get that shape of the eye without having to sit there and futz with it over and over as I'm drawing, because I am going to be doing this piece that I'm working on right now, which I will show you. I'll show you what the animation is currently. So I'm drawing this right now. I am doing this completely hand drawn. I'm like probably a lot of people that work in 3D. I'm not that great at drawing. I've gotten a lot better because I've been concentrating on it so hard in the last few years. But I'll just let this play well. But I'm not that great at it. And my goal is to tell a story. And to me, the only thing that really matters is the end product. And if I have to build a rigged character to make this, I will. I know that with my level of drawing skills, that I'm going to have a lot of trouble with the inconsistency of this character as she animates here. And I'll cover more of the animation in a different video. I've been shooting reference and doing a lot of test animations using rough animator, so I can just draw on my iPad whenever. Like I said, I will put that in the file up on Gumroad for free. I'm also going to be making videos on how I did this background. If anyone has seen the show Arcane, I did the backgrounds in a very similar way to the way the artist at Fortiche did. I did a little bit of work on that show, not as an artist, as a producer. The technique they're doing is not original to them. However, they push that farther than anybody has up to this point. I started out building this restaurant just by finding it on Street View, Google Street View, and then making the painting and then projecting that painting back onto the 3D geometry. So I'll be covering that in another video. All right. Thank you, everybody. Like and subscribe. Check me out on Instagram. I post stuff nearly daily. And it's just Chris Newhan _art for that. Thank you.